It is Thursday, October 18th, 2018, and this is the MMA Beat. Thank you for joining me, everyone. My name is Luke Thomas. We're live right here inside of our New York City studios on MMAfighting.com. All right, I'm with SiriusXM, as I mentioned, of course, MMA Fighting. To my left is the rest of the panel. That is Danny Segura right here from MMA Fighting. That is Brian Campbell, makes his triumphant return from CBS Sports. And at the end is the man in the hat, Chuck Mindenhall from The Ringer, as well as MMAfighting.com. How we doing, gents?
You all right?
Yeah?
Yeah.
Everyone chipper, ready to rock?
Fired up.
Yeah.
Fired up.
This is my domain. I'm back in the third seat.
Yeah. When was the last time you were on? It's been a while, right?
I think you guys took the last 2 months off, but I'm available.
Yeah.
We were just trying to, hide from Brian. That's what we were doing.
Yeah.
All right, let's get to it. This is going to be an interesting show because there's a lot of important stories to get to, but a lot of them intertwine with boxing because the business just intertwines with boxing. Now, we'll talk about some of the stuff related to pay-per-view down the road here on the show. Let's start with this one. I can't tell if this is the dumbest story I've ever seen, or it's the story we deserve, or if it's even real. It might just be. So, Brian, I'll throw to you first on this one because you, so the one who straddles both worlds here. Khabib Nurmagomedov and Floyd Mayweather are going back and forth in the media, and people have said, "Are you really going to cover this story?" Why wouldn't I cover this story? Why shouldn't we? How is this, seriously, and I'll start this way, how is this story any less legitimate? Now, I know they made the fight between McGregor and Mayweather, but at this juncture where they were jawing back and forth for that first one, how is this story any less legitimate? Which is to say, is the story legitimate at all?
It's not legitimate at all. Could it still make money? That's why we're talking about it. Could it still make clicks? All of the above, yes. It's less legitimate because we've already seen it before last year, Mayweather, McGregor. But it's really stupid, and it's got a very interesting, bad-tasting ending to it if we keep going down this road for the sport of MMA. Like, the whole idea of comparing boxing and MMA is so cliche. It's so 10 years ago. We did it for a couple days last week to fit the narrative, or last year to fit the narrative of Mayweather-McGregor, fill out those columnists on the casual newspapers, if you will. Mm-hmm. But the reality is nobody cares, but yet, if MMA's top stars are going to continue to almost, what's the right word, whore themselves out to Floyd Mayweather, if that's the end game, if he's the final boss down the road where you cash your soul into him to make big money, it's shameless. And I think Khabib should be better than that because last week on this show, you guys spent a strong chunk of time talking about Khabib's all about standing up for his standards and his beliefs. He'll get back to 2 million because it's all about the principles, brother, of protecting his team.
Last week? You just said we were offered 2 million.
Yeah, I haven't seen it in a while, but yet he'll cash in the other half of his soul for the potential of 10 million to get embarrassed in front of 4.5 million people. I don't see it. I don't want it. I don't get it. I need winners. Get it away from me, okay?
What can I even say about this?
We're all laughing, but then when I talk about it on my radio show and I talk about why it's dumb and I talk about why it won't happen, I'm just repeating the same things I said about McGregor-Mayweather.
Yeah,
again,
exactly.
That fight came to fruition. Okay, so there's a big difference. But when you speak about it and you talk badly about it, or critically, however you want to put it, you're not saying anything different than what we already said. So then you're like, well, how illegitimate is it really?
Yeah, this caught me by surprise because we know that Khabib was very critical of McGregor when he was the champion. Look, this guy doesn't defend the belt. Look, this guy's out there doing whatever he is doing with boxing. And now he is out there calling Mayweather. So, and we know if something like that does go down, it'll have, effects on the lightweight title because it's not going to get defended. Let's be real. And that in itself is an issue. But how silly is this? I'm already seeing Mayweather making claims, well, Khabib dropped McGregor. I didn't drop McGregor. So
or I'll fight Conor after I'll get him in a rematch.
It's so insane. I mean, this needs to stop.
I mean, it was a step towards an adventure the first time, right? We could all say that basically because it was like something we had never seen. We never seen two guys.
It was a perfect storm.
It was a perfect storm. So we've seen
it
though. We've seen it play out. We've seen the circus of it. We've seen the boxing side, the Stadio boxing guys versus the MMA media. We've seen every narrative that there is. What is the narrative on this other than there's like some kind of ascendancy of status that Khabib that he can actually have a back and forth with Floyd Mayweather. That's really what it comes down to. At this point, he's at he can actually talk to any fighter in the world, and there would be interest just because there's a big money fight. That's all this means. To me, I'm like, it's completely pointless. I have no idea why anybody would be curious as to how that would play out.
So you say nobody, but you don't think it would sell?
Oh, it would sell because casuals would jump on that like flies on crack.
It
right?
would sell, but I honestly
Tell me why
don't.
this
I don't even think it would sell half though of what
It's
we just saw
missing
with
something.
Okay,
McGregor.
but half is still
No, that's a lot.
That's 2 million pay-per-view buys.
Maybe not. Maybe even way less than that. But I'm saying, like, I don't think it would have any of the same kind of lure. You know, like the allure that McGregor had. I mean, the bottom line is he fed the imagination with the self-belief and his boxing skills. There was a lot of
And the world tour.
Yeah, people wanted to believe that he had a chance in that fight. That was the big difference. I can't see that.
Yeah,
how
there's
that
so
would
much
even-
hatred of Mayweather built up with the magic of McGregor
Yeah.
that he could elevate himself to do this against anybody. You could see an avenue of victory, catch Floyd with one punch, even though we saw that the power didn't translate. Habib can't take him down in this fight, can he?
No. Well, maybe he could,
maybe
right?
every third round we let him have one of the like a TikTok.
But there was so many elements. I'm not trying to excuse the first, Mayweather-McGregor fight, but there were elements going into it that you could be like, okay, like, there was, that whole saying is like, oh, whoever's going to beat Mayweather, it can't be a boxer. You know what I'm saying? There was things said out there.
That was dumb too.
Yeah, that was dumb too. But I mean, here's literally, if you make a fight between McGregor and Khabib, just striking, I'd put my money on McGregor.
For sure.
Right, and so now you're going to take Khabib and put him in that equation against Mayweather, the greatest of all time, one of the greatest of all time. I mean, it's just ridiculous that we're even talking about it, but the possibility of it happening, it's there, right?
How is it that we're in 2018 and Floyd Mayweather is the house guest who just won't
That's
leave?
exactly what I was just going to say. It's like an infection that MMA has contracted we can't get rid of. It's like he keeps, every time something happens and you want to see the bigness of MMA restore itself and actually play out in other ways, here comes Mayweather just to kind of throw the narrative back off again.
And the thing is, I can't even blame him, Brian, because remember, he met up with Pacquiao to do the second one over in Tokyo at some rave, which was just beyond weird. And then it was Khabib and his people who pushed this into the media, and he was like, well, I'll take another 9-figure payday to beat up somebody who's never boxed before. How is it that MMA's biggest stars keep lining up to get beaten up by this guy for a big payday?
It's because MMA's biggest stars don't traditionally get paid what they would deserve in comparison to boxing's biggest stars. That's why that door's open. It's also because Floyd's in that twilight of his career where he's figured out how to make matchmaking even easier, and people keep taking the bait now that he no longer wants to fight boxers. But back to my original point, I want to put this on you, Luke.
Okay.
With a very full beard, very manly man today, as always.
Certainly am.
Shouldn't Khabib, a man of principles, who says from the beginning every interview, unlike McGregor, like you said, I'm not about the titles, I'm not about the money, and I'm about the glory, I'm about proving that I'm the best. This is a full default cash-in of the damn soul.
Yeah, I don't know what to make of it. I can't tell if it's just those guys wanting to put themselves out there in the media, if they're looking for some kind of media validation. Oh, well, here we're talking about Khabib and Mayweather. This is a certification of now Khabib's ascendant star power. Maybe it's just that. Let me just leave this one last question on it, because I know folks are like, why are you covering this? You invite the Logan Pauls and the Floyd Mayweathers into your world. They don't just leave when you think you're done with them. They stick around like a bad odor, man. This is true. This is the warning. It's like when you want to cross boundaries that you're not supposed to cross, you don't get to put the toothpaste back in the tube. It stays out, and now we have to linger with these dumb-ass questions. So let me put this to the table like this, and we'll move on from it. What is the best way to cover the story if you're one of us? How do you cover this?
I mean, exactly what we're doing.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you just basically are pointing out its absurdity. I mean, you have to take it seriously to an extent. As we said this exact same thing when we were going back to the Mayweather-McGregor stuff at the early stages of it. We just didn't think, it seemed like a stupid hypothetical in the end, because you're like, this will never happen. It can't happen. Yeah. And as it kept going and you realize it might happen, you had to treat it with a certain seriousness and keep upping your serious meter on it. Like, okay, wait, I have to take this seriously now. I feel like we're in that. You can still live right now on a very skeptical, like, why are we talking about this? But who knows, man? If it starts to actually take some kind of foothold, I think you have to treat it as seriously as if it's legitimately going to happen. You have to cover it. So,
well, we poo-pooed the original idea of Maymac because I didn't believe it could happen. I didn't think UFC would step. I underestimated Dana White and UFC's shamelessness to try to cash in.
Never underestimate that.
Yeah. Now, are we missing the overall point of even talking about this? That this is Khabib, who already said, I know they may have repaired it since then, but already said publicly to the UFC, I'll give back my $2 million if you fire my guy, all that stuff. Is this his way of sort of hedging, getting some leverage, saying, okay, if I have to stand on my principles and walk away, then I'll go do that pay-per-view?
If nothing else, what did the Conor McGregor experience showed us? Yes, he got the fight in the end, but what he showed was, and Diaz too, I'm going to get my boxing license. Remember that? This is all just a way to get some extra leverage to get whatever they want. And they pulled Zubair Tukhugov from the fight with Artem Lobov, but did they cut him? I don't know if they cut him. They just brought in Michael Johnson. So we'll have to see about that. Danny, any final thoughts on this?
I just think it's ridiculous, but I really hope it doesn't happen because this is really bad for MMA. I think when McGregor lost, people were saying like, well, he lost in a sport that, he doesn't compete in. He still got tons of exposure, made him a bigger star and whatnot. But at the end of the day, these are guys that are within our sport, the top of our guys taking L's. That's just a fact. I know it's in boxing, it's in a different sport, but the casuals are looking at McGregor taking a loss from Mayweather and they go, hey, this guy ain't real. But then when you play him the Eddie Alvarez fight, you go, hey, look, this guy's super legit.
Any number of directions you can go with Nurmagomedov right now within MMA that equates to a huge fight. Like you got the Ferguson fight now, which has matured
and
into
historically
this epic.
important.
Yes, I mean that is a huge fight at this point. You got GSP, that you could do if you wanted to do that. I mean, they could do the. I don't think that the rematch should happen right away, but like you could do a rematch. That's some big money. It's stupid.
Well,
to
rematch a
contemplate.
Bear. I mean, that's a pay-per-view waiting.
But it's stupid to have to contemplate this like distraction.
All right, so that leads me to the other part, which is the clear thing that we do know is real about all of this, which is to say, Khabib Nurmagomedov, to your point, Brian, has been really upset, saying you can take the $2 million. And we got to some of that last week, but here's the point I wanted to make. I was drawing upon a conversation I had with a high-level official in the UFC a couple of years ago, and they told me something, and at first I blew it off as them just trying to conveniently find a logic to not pay people. And this person told me, if you pay these guys a lot, they stop competing with the same degree of regularity. And there are some people where that's not exactly true, but that it doesn't fit. But there is something true to this. He gets his first real major big payday, and the first thing he does is complain. Nate Diaz, same kind of thing. Conor McGregor has certainly had some strained relations with the UFC. Ronda Rousey, she didn't have an issue with UFC management exactly, but she up and left. Brock Lesnar kind of comes and goes on his own kind of thing. What is it about MMA? Because we'll talk about Canelo later. Canelo goes and beats Gennady Golovkin, and the next thing he does is sign a $400 million deal for 11 fights. Can you imagine?
He's in DAZN, brother.
He's in DAZN. But okay, put Canelo aside for just a moment. Danny, I'll throw this one to you. Why is it that when the top, not the mid-tier or even the higher tier, but the top-tier UFC stars, they get a big fight, they get big money, and everything turns ugly afterwards?
It's strange, but I think a lot of it is their journey to that spot. Usually a lot of these guys have to go through things, right? Khabib, not getting a title shot for so long and campaigning for it when he thought he deserved one. And you can go down the list. Nate Diaz, before he got that big payday, he wasn't making all that much money, and I think Sage Northcutt was making more money than him.
Remember when they used Khabib ahead of 205 in the negotiations?
Right,
yeah,
exactly. They played him so Eddie Alvarez could get the fight.
So they do feel like, okay, I've been wronged, and now that I have the leverage, well, let me turn things on you. And, also in boxing, you make so much money that, you want to continue, you want to keep doing that. With MMA, you got to play your cards a little more because if you lose that belt, all of a sudden you're not making as much money, So you want to stick and hold that belt as long as you can, and you were going to do and make the choices that will allow you to do so. So, yeah.
I think you wake up with cotton sheets, you want to get out of bed, man, get busy. You wake up with satin sheets, you just want to lay in bed for a little while.
Yeah, but the boxers don't. When was the last time Danny Garcia or Adrian Broner after a loss was like, I'm done, I'm out, I'm checking out? No. They keep signing up for $1 million bouts like it's nothing. In MMA, these guys take, they at a bare minimum, Chuck, they take a break.
Well, there's a lot of factors, honestly, but the big one that I see is when you get to the big money amounts that you're talking about, usually that person has had to put in a lot of work. And even going into each fight, there's a lot of promotion. There's so much more that the promotion asks of them at that point. It's no longer just the fight. It's a whole commitment to whatever the extended obligations are. Now, most of us would be like, well, that's still going to be worth it if you're making millions of dollars. But I do think that it's a different sort of thing. A lot of these guys are not real savvy. They're not as charismatic. They're not I think Nate Diaz probably has, and Nick probably both have social anxiety to an extent. I don't think they really love to be in front of cameras all the time and scrutinized all the time. I think that there are a lot of different mental factors that go into that, that maybe supersede some of what they might make. But honestly, man, I've thought about this a lot too, because you see these guys reach a point where you're like, okay, now we're paying attention, and then they start to drop off. And I'm not sure the exact, you know what I mean? Like when it comes down to it, I'm not sure if it's just a combination of those factors or what, but who knows? I don't know.
I would like to add to your point that the road to boxing, usually these stars are picked early on, right? And then they get tune-up fights, they get appropriate fights, right? They go 20, 30-0. And in a way, they get pampered and sort of taken care of to the way to the top. In MMA, man, the road to the top is grueling. You got to do so much media work, right? You got to put up with so much politics and so much things going on in the UFC. So once you get there, it's almost like, okay, I need a break from this. You know, now let me exercise my big star power. While these boxers that are making so much money, they've been comfortable this whole time.
Oh yeah, if you're Danny Garcia and you make $2.5 million
Yeah.
in a big fight, you get 6 months off, 8 months off.
Right.
Then you get another $2 million in a soft fight. There's no soft fights.
You hear a lot of
unfortunately.
guys too, if they're not complaining, they're usually saying something like what Tony Ferguson said, hey man, I just want to step back now for a minute and collect myself. It's almost like they have to piece themselves back together after the whole process, not just the fight.
MMA is exhausting. Yeah.
It seems to be more exhausting. I don't know how to quite quantify that against boxing, but it's
weird
like,
because boxing training is intense, and to get good, you have to start at a very early age. But I could be speaking very much out of turn here. I think it's like the mistreatment from the UFC, or at least the perceived unequal treatment, whatever you want to call it. I also think the training breaks these guys, man. I think it runs them ragged. Brian, I'm wondering if you agree.
Oh, yeah.
It's like the degree of granular detail you have to be a very successful boxer, like we just saw Bud Crawford against Benavidez. I mean, what a ridiculous technician he is. But is he damaging his body day in, day out in the same way that a Tony Ferguson is?
No.
I don't know that he is.
And in MMA, as you know, there's so many more ways to lose a bout. There's so many more disciplines inside of a mixed martial arts bout that there's so much more you have to train and prepare for and be on a top level in every category, and that leads to overtraining and injuries. Why is there so many more top level MMA fights where you see a guy pulling out at the last minute compared to boxing? And I think that there's still the mentality, which used to be in boxing in the 70s and 80s with gym wars and the idea that, you know, you make yourself in the gym and sparring and you basically have these killer fights with the cameras off that nobody sees. People finally smartened up and we're like, you can't really train that way. I think MMA is not necessarily fully woke on that point.
I also think Rousey was a celebrated figure in the media, but remember, she had a meteoric rise where her fights were literally 16 seconds.
Yes.
Remember that?
Yeah.
She wasn't having these like long,
she had
ridiculous...
the three fights in the UFC that were within a minute, they were all confined within a minute.
Versus, you know, Khabib's out there just putting in the work. So the last thing I'll say about this is it just kind of concerns me because if you're the UFC, how do you respond? You give a little bit of space to a Khabib who's out there saying you can have your $2 million back. But when you do that and you don't forcefully respond, it just weakens your perceived leverage and power and your status to the wider public because you're not ever firing back. It's a damned if you do, damned if you don't kind of position.
It's almost, in some weird abstract way, you almost look at it like Jenga. Like they get to a point where they don't want to make their tower topple because they get so far. So to just take another fight, you know, the fight to get to where you're at, where you can make, let's say, a couple $1 million, but then just take because the UFC is always forever trying to push you in a fight you may lose or in situations that are not really great for you. And, you know, and I think we see a lot of guys say, no, I'm not going to do that. But to do that, though, you're just risking so much. You're risking so much of that money, you know what I mean? Especially for the champions and stuff like that. You're just risking it all to accommodate the UFC, who may not accommodate you on the back end of it. You know what I mean?
You open up the Pandora's box of soft touches to keep guys more active each year. I think that's a dark road if you start going that way.
Yeah, I don't know what the good answer is.
And before we move on to the next topic, I just wanted to add like a perspective to this. I'm not saying I agree with it, but Mark Raimondi talked to Chael Sonnen and asked him about this. He was like, oh, so what do you make of, you know, all these guys that are, you know, not so happy with the UFC once they reach to the top? Obviously, he called them a bunch of wimps, but he did bring an interesting point. He's like, the UFC there's so many guys out there that are hungry, that are starving for, you know, a shot at the title, and the UFC, you know, gives them a chance, right? Yeah. The UFC helps them out. Like McGregor, to get at the top, he got good matchups, you know, at the beginning. He got promoted properly. I mean, the UFC gave him a hand, and now when they're at the top, you know, they turn around on them and there's that. And you can make the case for many fighters. I mean, even like a guy like Tyron Woodley, who, you know, doesn't have maybe the greatest relationship with the UFC, he still waited out. He set out and he got a title shot eventually, right? He got a life-changing opportunity. I'm not saying I agree with that perception. I always do think fighters should make more money, but it is an interesting one that Chael Sonnen brings. Like, at the end of the day, the guys at the top got there in some way with help with the UFC.
It's tough to maintain the attitude, man. Like the attitude, what you're saying when you come up, that hungry attitude to like, I'm going to take over there, I'm going to prove it. Well, at some point you have proved what you're trying to prove on that level, and then you're making the money. Guys like Daniel Cormier, who keep real centered and grounded even at their height, even when they're ascended to wherever they're going, they're the ones who are amazing to me at some point, because you're like, wow, this is an example of a guy who's in a prize fighting game where it's all about vanity and smiting your chest, kind of still pulling their pants up, over the, you know what I mean, tucking in, and you're like, you know what I mean? They're not being splashy in any sense, and those are the weird anomalies, and sometimes you gotta, I look to those guys as like, maybe you take a piece of that, his attitude. How do you kind of emulate that a little more?
Well, he plays the long game, but he has the ability to do so. A lot of these guys are trash talkers to elevate themselves in the moment. They don't have that kind of stand-up.
Well, Cormier also benefited from the fact that he could go 2 different weight classes. He had a historic rival, which made him a lot of money early on.
His greatest thing, though, is he's organic with a lot of his own promotion. Like, he's a very organic guy. Like, he's just going to let it naturally do what it wants to do.
He's so talented on the mic. Plus, this is his second athletic career. Like, this is all bonus time for him, if you really think about it. Last thing I'd say is also, you can't really make money in the UFC by and large unless you have either the title or proximity to the title. And so when those guys get it, they want to just hoard it and keep everything at arm's distance. And that's just not a great model to develop nice feelings.
And parlay into the bigger next one, and the bigger next one. And sometimes that's just, it's just not the model sometimes.
This has happened too many times for this to be a coincidence. Just too many times.
And then if you get big enough, Floyd calls, and that's
that's what you're looking for.
I like how, and I saw Michael Bisping. I love Michael Bisping. He was defending. He was like, yo, Khabib. No. He's like, Khabib could go the full 12 rounds. And I'm in no position to disagree. But it's like, this is the measure of success.
I know. Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah, I could definitely not get knocked the fuck out if I fight Floyd. Like, I mean,
last thing on that. Like I said, it's an adventure with McGregor, but aren't you like 5 steps removed when you get to this point where you're like, well, what is? It's just so bizarre to me that, like you're not even in the white hot center anymore of what's appealing. That's what bothers me about it. Like, dude, you're 9 degrees this way now. Like, it doesn't even make it.
It's a high level version of Jackass.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Right? Like, let's put rockets on my rollerblades and see if I can make it down the hill. Hey, you made it all the way down the hill. Sure, you got maimed at the bottom, but anyway. All right, this is not a good use of everyone's time. Now, here's what it is. GSP spoke to ESPN this week. Didn't say a ton, but did provide a little bit of perspective that I think is worth discussing, saying, you're not really feeling it right now. That's not to say he wouldn't come back. He had high praise for Tyron Woodley. He had high praise for Khabib Nurmagomedov, but, just right now, he's got money. He's got investments, businesses, real estate. He's feeling okay. Do you think GSP comes back? What do you make of his what's your big takeaway from his comments?
I think he does, because before he fought Michael Bisping, there was still all this talk. When is he going to come back? When is he going to come back? And he was always very distant about it. He never committed. And then until he actually did, then we knew it was something serious and he was training and all that. So I do think he won't come back anytime soon, but I do think he'll come back eventually. I think GSP, naturally, he's just a competitor. He said it himself, I'm healthy and wealthy. He's still feeling good. He wants to compete. And he's just seeing how things, pan out. I think, he was very high on Khabib Nurmagomedov, but, Khabib has his hands tied right now. There's so much going on around him. So I think he's just waiting for the dust to settle and see what happens and then sort of, pick his perfect opportunity to come back.
It's easy to say he's healthy and wealthy because the UFC's not giving the fight that he wants. He wants fights that extend his legacy. He's been very out in front about that, and that means another chance at a title to become the first champ.
Yeah.
We never say it. We'll never. Can this be the last time anyone's ever tried to utter that phrase out of their mouth?
It's like a Wendy's burger. I got the double, now the triple stack.
Right, and because he didn't defend the middleweight and kind of double-cross Dana White, and we talk about leverage of becoming a star. How many people actually have leverage in the UFC right now? Conor McGregor, Rousey if she came back tomorrow, sometimes John Jones when they need his star power, and GSP. Really, nobody else. Brock Lesnar. And
the high earners.
GSP is basically saying that, UFC doesn't like the idea that if I do fight Khabib and I win that title, I'm not going to defend. It's not like I'm going to fight Tony Ferguson next. I'm going to give it back. So I think it's very easy like this. Either UFC treats him like the legend he is and plays his game, because we've seen them shamelessly attempt to play games to get pay-per-view buys. So why are you not making Khabib versus GSP right now, UFC? And if you're not going to do that, UFC, if you're going to stand firm, then I'm going to point the arrow back at GSP, and I'm going to say, fight Woodley or get off my timeline,
here
brother.
He is.
All right? Because guess what? Oh, GSP is going to be 38 next May. You know who's going to be 37 next April? Tyron Woodley. Make the fight. Let's find out who's the greatest welterweight of all time. With all respect to Matt Hughes, let's find out who is the greatest welterweight of all time. Quote the Campbell, nevermore.
Yeah, well, that was a hard one to follow. But I will say that GSP, he was the first guy who was I thought the first true professional in MMA. Like, he would show up.
Seems like the last one, too.
Yes. So it's like, we saw him do this. He's also a true professional in the sense that he subtweets the hell out of the UFC all the time. He basically lives in a state of, I'm going to say this to get the fans' reaction, and then we'll see what the UFC does. It's basically he knows how to manipulate the media. Yeah. And I sometimes we've been living basically on a gauge of his moods for the last 5 years. What is he going to do? Well, is he going to come back? We've been talking about this for the last 5 years.
Are you a little sick of that game?
I am sick of the game, to be honest. But I'm like, in this particular case, I think he really wants to fight Khabib Nurmagomedov, and I think he's kind of planting it out there in a way that's saying, like, his psychology on this is always, I don't really need to do anything. So if you want me to do that, I'll do it. And they know that's a big fight. You know what I mean? He's basically putting it in their court to make it happen, but he's basically saying he wants the fight. This is just the way he's operated. I mean, he's always been this way. So I think he does come back. Obviously, I think he comes back, but I think he's playing the short game right now of trying to get the fight he wants.
Danny?
Yeah, I agree with everything Chuck is saying. And I think I just want to add that GSP's timing is not, the media's timing is not the UFC's timing. Because for a long time, we're like, all right, we need, he needs to be back for this card, or, this is happening in his division. He should fight Tyron Woodley. And then he came back at a time, he moved up a weight class. He came back at a time that we didn't really see it coming. So I think if he's going to come back, it's going to be one of those things where it's just random and he just springs it up.
And UFC and GSP aren't fully bros right now. Remember, they forced him to announce the Bisping fight when he was injured, and he told them he was injured. They said, let's not talk about that right now. So
I remember one time you'd mentioned something, I think it was maybe the last time we were talking about GSP, is like there are certain fighters now that have ascended to the level within the UFC that they're kind of outliers in the model. The paradigm doesn't make sense to them anymore. They don't really fit anywhere because they were kind of big enough to call their own shots. Conor McGregor was like that. Maybe Nate Diaz to an extent, but then GSP is certainly another one. I feel like that's still where he's at. It's just, we don't know how to deal with guys like that because they just don't fit into the structure as easily.
That's a great point, because I feel like the light at the end of the tunnel, fighting in the UFC model is the title, right? You win the belt, you're the champion. Now you get all these big fights, right? GSP doesn't really need the title to make a big fight, right? Same thing with Conor McGregor, same thing with Nate Diaz. So this whole idea of like headlining pay-per-views with champions, it's already somewhat getting outdated, because you got megastars that do not require of the belt and do not, frankly, want the belt, to be honest. They just want big fights. Yeah. So GSP's in this weird area, like a few fighters, even the Brock Lesnar, that they don't really fit in the model because the title is not, is not in play for them.
You know what would make everybody happy? You know what would fix everything? GSP wants a chance at the third title. UFC wants a title to headline every card. GSP versus Nate for the 165 title. And then when GSP gives it up, we'll just close that division down and forget it ever happened, all right?
That's fun. I'll say this. I think it makes sense to check in with GSP periodically, especially after a big fight like this. And maybe if Conor had won and come back in 2 years and he had done something truly historic, maybe that would have whet GSP's appetite. But it turns out that the other guy won, and that's something you could still do, just not right now. Khabib needs to kind of establish...
Why couldn't let's call you on that. Why couldn't they do that right now? Why is that not the perfect fight?
They could, but I think GSP's thought is, if this guy can keep doing this, I could double the earnings, right? I mean, you could really do something special.
But Khabib's villain factor, if you're selling hero and villain to casual fans,
I don't know that Khabib's that much of a villain, to be honest.
No, personally, I think he's basically the hero in this larger equation.
I think even the fan base.
To casual fans,
I'm not sure. I don't know if I agree with that.
My timeline of casuals after 229 blew up with Khabib should be fired, deported, and never appear in an octagon again.
You had the person on ESPN's, who was it, Get Up or whatever, maybe it was SportsCenter, telling Dana on the air she agreed with what Khabib did. I don't buy that at all.
No. Go on my face. I'll give you my credentials. Go on my Facebook and Twitter.
You follow a bunch of sissies and, whatever.
No, I do think to this point, to a large demographic, and usually McGregor fans, Khabib, became a villain. I do agree.
I think he became a complicated character. Outright villain, like a
outright villain.
You need generic hero and villains to sell
to some
monster pay-per-views. GSP is the elite hero, so I think this is the time when you capitalize on that fake villain.
Let me perfect your idea of a 165-pound title.
Wow.
And you brought this up, and shout out to Michael Chiesa. Tyron Woodley versus GSP, make that the final fight for the 170-pound title. and then, you know, split the weight classes.
And then
look, GSP just wants a one-off, doesn't want to defend the title. Just make that fight, and that's
It actually does get what you want, where you close the division at that weight. You just shift at 175 out.
Great idea.
And you don't have, you know, the issue with GSP holding a title, and now this guy has to defend it, and if he vacates it, it looks terrible.
Fair enough.
Tremendous cream, right? $1 in a dream, right?
You are on fire. You had a lot of coffee before the show, didn't you?
I don't know about coffee.
What was that unsweetened tea I was drinking? Wow.
Heroin, I
Maybe
believe it
something
was.
else.
Yeah. All right, so that brings us to a guy who probably is a hero, at least certainly to many inside the hardcore community. Eddie Alvarez, it was announced this week, and then last night there was a call with one championship because that's where he joined. He'll be fighting at lightweight, which is their 169 pounds. He had actually fought at welterweight, but of course they have a different weight cutting system there. In any case, Danny, I'll go to you first on this. Good call by Eddie Alvarez to go to one. Yes or no?
So the fan in me is a little bit upset because, let's face it, one is a great promotion. It's not a promotion that I tune into all the time. But, you know, the matchups and the roster there is not something that I will watch his fights, but it's not something that excites me, say, as a Bellator. You know, you get very interesting matchups over there. You know, a rematch with Michael Chandler, which we know how those fights went. So the fan in me is a little bit upset because Eddie Alvarez still has a lot of fight left in him. I do think he's a top 5 lightweight, and I want to see him compete among, you know, top 10 lightweights. You know, that's just the fan in me. But, you know, as a human being, he totally made the right call in the sense of he is older. How old is he? Like 34? 34 years old. You know,
a lot of wars.
the UFC lightweight title picture is very murky right now. Him getting back up there, which, you know, it implies him making the money. You know, it's a rough road, right? So he can go to one, make a lot of money, fight lesser competition, and sort of take the Ben Askren route. And look, that's great for his career. At the end of the day, like, I want to see a healthy Eddie Alvarez. I want to see somebody that, you know, retires in good form, and he's been in wars, man. And at the same time, I want him to be, you know, healthy and wealthy, as GSP said.
Yeah.
I mean, he's the strangest guy to contemplate career-wise because you could actually label him a journeyman at this point, but it would be a completely misleading thing to say because obviously he's been a champion in each one of these two. So he's both things. It's just kind of his trajectory. I guess from a fan standpoint, I was kind of hoping he would go back to Bellator because he was on that very first Bellator card. You know what I mean? Like, he's the original guy. It just seemed like
he's the OG.
it seemed like a perfect circle for him to end up back over there. But I can't hate on him, man. The bottom line is he has, you know, like that old Chris Lieben, like, are you not entertained? You know, after these wars, he's entertained a lot of fans, man. I'm like, at this point, I'm like, if he wants to be this his victory lap, and he wants to make some money, I'm all for it, man. You know what I mean?
It's actually pretty brilliant. And the debate, like you mentioned, isn't about UFC. It's really, should he gone to Bellator or should he do this one thing? And it's brilliant because he wants to find a way to extend his legacy as far as it can go. So in his mind, the way to do that is to win this title in this one, you know, promotion that he's never fought in. So he could be the guy that's won 8 titles, the hashtag Bodog fight, right? He's still got that in his back pocket.
Yes.
But the reason why this is brilliant is because if you read the quotes, he's talking about that they gave a package for him and his family that even Bellator couldn't match. So he might be getting his retirement right here in the next couple of years. And even though we all prefer him in Bellator for the sexy matchups, what does Bellator do better than any other promotion? Find a soft home for guys that are well past their prime and put them in the right matchups that can still make them main event money. So he's still coming back to his buddy Coker, and we're going to get that Chandler trilogy, I don't know, 3 years from now? Yeah.
You think so?
I think it's brilliant. I think this is great.
I think you get that longevity at the higher weight classes, like heavyweight. It's hard to get longevity at a lightweight, bro.
It is, and he has been in some wars. I mean,
he's been in crazy wars, And for a while, he wasn't fit. He wasn't being finished. He was being wobbled, but you know, towards the end, he started getting finished. Obviously, McGregor, and then, you know, his last outing with Dustin Poirier. But it is somewhat nice, and it is a success story. It's nice seeing him go out this way because this is a guy. I remember when I was coming up in media, going to local events in South Florida. When he lived in South Florida, he would go and coach his guys that were like 1-2, 1-1, you know, just starting out in their careers. And he gave me a few interviews. I remember he gave me, I think I might have been the first person to interview him when he was switching over to the UFC and he was fighting Donald Cerrone. And he was always great with the media. You know, he provided us so many good wars, so many good fights. So it's nice seeing him go out on top.
Good on him, too, in the sense that you see what happened against Conor McGregor in this huge fight, right, at Madison Square Garden. It's opened up this. He gets just, I don't know how humiliated, but he didn't look good in the fight. And I think that he would be the first to admit. But to come back from that and put himself in a position where he was coveted and where the fans still were really behind him, I think that's, again, it's more of an anomaly in the fight game to see somebody correct that perception. I think it's just because he is who he is. He's just a sincere guy. And when he started going in for that the most violent, whatever he was saying, the most violent man or whatever, that was his title. I think that was a brilliant stroke of promotional
he won so many
genius.
fans over.
I know, exactly. So good for him, man, on all levels, and I'm sure he'll still continue to be who he is over there. It's just now we have to watch him in the wee hours of the morning.
Yeah.
Well, now Luke can get that Shinya trilogy that he's been talking about for a long time.
Yeah, I can't wait. I mean, here's the thing. Like, I'm with Danny on this one. It's like I cannot possibly be mad at the guy for going to get paid. In fact, I'm quite happy for him. But like the fans have been kind of battling the media on this one. The fans are tripping up on social media and they're saying, "Yeah, that's not that great for us." They're right. It's not that great for them. And I don't know what the answer to that is. Sometimes guys are just going to do what's in their own interest. And okay, let's correct that. It's probably great for the fans in Asia.
Yes.
Because they get the acquisition. It's not great for stateside fans.
It's almost the opposite of what happened with Ben Askren, right? Because we all wanted to see Ben Askren in the fights that we had never seen. We wanted that petition come down from him and fight all these names that we were interested in. We've already seen Eddie Alvarez and against most of those guys. I don't know how many matches you could say right now, like, oh, I never saw Eddie against this guy, and that's going to hurt.
Nate Diaz.
Do you buy his argument, though, that he can meaningfully add to his resume, assuming he gets the title? Because to me, it's like a lot of these guys get to a point where their resume is more or less set. And I don't know the answer. I guess I have to see how he wins and how he looks and what happens. But I'm somewhat skeptical of the idea.
I mean, he talks out of both sides of his mouth a little bit because he kind of poo-pooed the UFC belt at one point as meaning nothing. So I can't imagine he really is getting paid. You know,
it's a nice way of saying I'm getting paid and I'm going to pay for my kids' college right now.
Yeah, but there is something
it does
to it.
add a little something. I think.
He has a very. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, Dave, but he does have a unique resume.
He does.
Beating the Bellator, and he beat the Bellator champ, World Series of Fighting champ, WEC champ, UFC champ, Strikeforce champ, One champ, Dream champ, like.
MFC champ.
MFC, dude, he's done something in lightweight.
Any big promotions?
He fought for Elite XC too.
Right. So
Barry Shaw, shout out.
We're talking about a ridiculous lightweight resume.
And he's always made a note of that. He's like, yo, I want to collect names. Like, I'm here to, I want to look at my record and have all these names. And adding the one title, I mean, he's still going to fight somebody that's legit, right? A skilled fighter. It definitely adds
the one title holder.
It's vacant right now.
Is it vacant?
Would you get fired up for an Eddie Alvarez, Ben Askren, Singapore super fight?
Sure.
Would that move at all? Would that move you?
Yeah, sure.
I'll watch it for sure.
I'll watch that. Yeah, that'd be interesting. That'd be
depends on what time in the morning it came out.
Yes,
3.
What do you make of the fact that obviously he's going to mean more to one than he would to the UFC, and he did not disparage the UFC at all, to be very clear about it. But remember, he went into that last Poirier fight. He wanted to get a new contract, didn't, bet on himself, lost, essentially, both in that effort and in that fight, and then goes to one. Does it say anything about... Did the UFC handle it correctly? Should they have re-signed him? Is I guess the question I'm asking.
No, they actually assessed him at the fair value, and he was very honest about that. He said, "I have no ill will against him. This is business. They thought they set my value at what they thought it was, and that's what it is. And there's more money coming out of Asia, so I'm going in that direction. And look, at 34, he was going to be a B-side. We said this on the show before to some big names, and he's probably going to suffer a couple of brutal losses in the long game. So
yeah, he's 34. He's coming off a loss, and the UFC lightweight picture has so many players. I mean, the ones who are being talked about now is Khabib, obviously Conor, Nate Diaz, Tony Ferguson, and Dustin Poirier, of course. You already have 5 players in there, and then you can go down the list, and there's still a bunch of killers down there.
Kevin Lee,
you can Kevin Lee, Edson Barbosa, etc. So, if there was another division in the UFC and Eddie Alvarez meant as much as, if you made the conversion as, say, another fighter, then yeah, but the UFC lightweight picture is so stacked that you don't really need him at this point. Like, he's not a huge necessity.
We had 2 Bellator shows last weekend. Let's very quickly talk about their headliners. We'll start first with Fedor. Chuck, I'll go with you on this one. He beats Chael Sonnen in a wild first round. Of course, before that, he beat Frank Mir. I'll be honest about it. I had left him at the side of the road, metaphorically speaking.
We all have.
Following the Maldonado.
So did Fabio Maldonado, yeah.
Jesus, that was a terrible, terrible loss. So here he is with 2 wins back-to-back. Let me ask
He won that fight.
Okay.
Hey, are they drug testing in Bellator right now?
Look, let's ask this question to you, Chuck. Does this, per the last conversation we just had about Eddie, do these wins in your mind help change the GOAT heavyweight debate? How seriously do you take these wins?
Well, man, I mean, he was already up there in my mind. He almost couldn't tarnish where I'd had him.
Is this a second chapter or something?
But that's what's interesting. It kind of is. I mean, at this point, because it's always fun to see a guy who basically, we talked about Arlovsky, who turned things around at some point, and Emelianenko's basically doing that. And it's not. You could say you could find anything you want to say about this, but let's say he beats Ryan Bader. okay, that becomes a whole different thing, right? Because Bader is still at the top, right? He's still where he needs to be. The other guys, maybe they've diminished, but he's supposed to diminish. So he's beating him in ways that, both guys you might have, I don't know if he was an underdog, but in my mind, he was kind of an underdog in these fights. Maybe he wasn't against Chael Sonnen though, right?
No,
I don't remember. So anyways, it doesn't matter. But, these guys are a little bit over the hill. So, but at the same time, he was so over the hill years ago that it does feel like a second chapter. And it's fun because this tournament, when it was set up, you're like, well, if they could somehow get Fedor through that thing and to this is the kind of the magic.
This is what the Strikeforce Grand Prix should have been.
This is what it was supposed to be. So, on that level, Bellator is winning because I think that they got a nice, compelling fight now in the finals. And
they got basically the best matchup they could get in the finals.
It's a cherry on top. You just nailed it. It's a cherry on top if he wins. There's no negative if he loses, and you don't add much to the last two victories, which were favorable matchups. Mir not a favorable matchup. Mir made it a favorable matchup by coming in head first and trying to mano-a-mano him. It's a perfect storm. It just worked out for him.
But how seriously do you take the wins? Is it a big deal to you?
I don't take the wins unless he beats Bader, and then it's a beautiful crown you put at the top of his thing. But can I pause and just say, Sonnen Fedor was the ultimate sloppy Super Bowl.
Were you
really
there?
was. No, I was supposed
Everybody
to be,
keeps
but
saying this.
I was.
I don't think it was that sloppy. I thought it was.
Are you kidding me? It was perfectly sloppy. It was like when I eat a gas station sandwich, like a roast beef or like a sloppy Joe or something. Like I want it to be sloppy. I want to get it on me.
Yeah.
This fight got on me.
I think you're exaggerating a little bit. I'm a little bit more with Danny on this.
Yeah, I don't think it was that bad. I mean, Sonnen displayed some good technique. He took him down, got a low single. I mean, the fight was
comparing
hectic.
it to Dada Kimbo. I mean, it wasn't that, but it was.
The fight was hectic in the sense of Sonnen didn't want to get hit, so he was doing everything possible not to get hit because Fedor was hitting quite hard. Yeah,
but sloppy. The term sloppy Super Bowl means you're mixing slop
also
with an odd competitive fight.
We're talking about the heavyweight division. Like, how many fights have you seen that look like that in the heavyweight division? A lot, man. You don't think so?
Guys, I'm glorifying this. I'm saying I love it. I want more. Remember when BJ Penn licked the blood? All right,
exactly. Yeah.
I
don't think it was that sloppy. It was a good fight.
Okay, how seriously do you take the wins?
So I think I'm with them in the sense of. Sure, beating Chael Sonnen means something. Beating Frank Mir means something. But, man, beating Ryan Bader, that's a different level. Because Ryan Bader is the best he's ever been, you know?
The answer is I don't think I know what it means yet, but it might mean something big.
I would pick Ryan Bader to beat most UFC heavyweights at this point. I think he's a top 5 UFC heavyweight. Yeah. Easy. So if you beat him at this point, it's like, oh, snap. But I also think that Fedor has done already so much that the GOAT conversation doesn't really include everything that's been going on in the last 3-4 years. I think it's all the work that he did in Pride.
Right.
So if he loses, it doesn't tarnish his GOAT status.
True.
His body of work was in Pride. His body of work was years ago.
But you agree if he beats Bader, it does add to it.
It does add something.
But it's entertainment. It adds a little.
It does a little bit. It does add a little bit to it. But to me, it's more about the way he's cleaning up the career. It's not really about the GOAT talk. It's about, look, this guy, we
finishing strong.
Finishing strong. And you're just saying you left him.
It's a great point.
You left him off to on the side of the road, and here he is. Not giving up, and this is again talk that goes to Andrei Arlovsky. Guys that we think they're done, and they're not really done. Fedor's looking good in Bellator, man. Those wins, I saw a video of him at the open workout, and I'm just,
he looks tremendous.
Well, you're never done at heavyweight too, and he just beat up a middleweight.
So if he went in there and knocked out Bader, I'm pretty sure he wouldn't be done. If he went in and knocked him out right away, I'm like, well, okay, what's the next big Fedor fight? You know.
Now that brings us to Ryan Bader, who had just a completely dominant win over Matt Mitrione the previous night. I mean, he made a point with the King Mo fight in this one. He hasn't even been punched in the face one time in this entire tournament. It's ridiculous when you consider it. You know, it really got me to thinking. Here he is. He's about to fight Fedor. He's about to fight a legend. To what extent it adds to his resume, you know, again, there's a debate about that. But it just got me to thinking between that and Eddie Alvarez. You know, you've got a lot of guys who want to get into the UFC because it is, by and large, and will probably always be the very best place to be. But it's not the best for everyone. Look at the case of Vinny Magalhaes. He's on the cusp of winning $1 million pulling guard on people. Yeah. It's amazing. Here is Ryan Bader. He might become the champ of Bellator, the first one ever to do it. Eddie Alvarez. You know what? I'm going to get paid. I'm going to get paid in Jakarta. Right? Not everyone is the good fit for the UFC. I think Ryan Bader, Danny, is like a great example of this. He'd just be a really, really talented guy at the UFC. In Bellator, he's the man.
Yeah, and he made a great point to this, like, speaking to the media, you know, leading up to his fight and even after it. He's like, look, in the UFC, there's extra elements. Like, I have to run my mouth. I have to go out there and do these things that... You could make the case, if you look at his resume when he was in the UFC, there was a point that he was undefeated. He could have easily gotten a title shot, and I don't think nobody would have complained. He had the body of work to deserve a title shot. Whether or not he was going to be, Daniel Cormier, you never know. Anything can happen in MMA. He could have been a UFC champion. But factors outside of that, outside of the cage, outside of the skill set, didn't allow him to do that. In Bellator, he just has to worry about winning. He just has to worry about going in there, training, and putting in a good performance. And we've talked about how doing media can be so exhausting to fighters. I think in some ways, it could be even detrimental to reduce in-cage performances. Some guys he said, I'm a wrestler. Wrestlers don't have to do media. There's wrestlers that become the best, national champions in a gym with 5 people. You know what I'm saying? He's just in there putting work. He's a competitor, and he doesn't need to go out of his way and go out of who he is to.
Well, he's gotten better too.
Yeah.
Though. Let's not be honest. I mean, he has
35.
one loss in the last 5 or 6 years. He's really gotten better, and now it's to the point where it's like every tournament you have. Ideally, you want a star to be born from it, right? Like the Super 6 in boxing gave you Andre Ward. Strikeforce gave you Daniel Cormier, right? We just had Alexander Usyk in the World Boxing Cruiserweight Classic that I know none of you watched. But
wait. I watched it.
Okay.
Come on now.
But obviously, if Fedor wins this tournament, it's a win-win for Bellator. But they can get a win we didn't see coming, which is a star was born in Ryan Bader, a guy we already knew. And the reason why that's possible is because he improved. He's only 35, which at heavyweight means you're in your prime. And he, I think, just figured out that heavyweight is his best division and might be the best version of him because at heavyweight, they don't really wrestle a lot. It's what Mitch Rion said for all the criticism the last few months leading into the fight. He's like, well, and I'm not proven against wrestlers because I don't face any.
They wrestle, but it's all upper body.
So I think he just figured out a prototype. Outside of Stipe Miocic, who has been the most dominant heavyweights in UFC history, it's been Randy Couture, Daniel Cormier, and Cain Velasquez. What are they? Undersized guys with great cardio and great wrestling. Ryan Bader's tall, but he's undersized in that regard.
No, he's big.
We said he wasn't that great in UFC. Maybe against elite light heavyweights with big speed. If you put him back in the UFC heavyweight division, to your point right now, I think he's an instant contender for the title.
Interesting.
He figured out how to get the best of himself, and he's using that old Randy Couture template.
Yeah, and it's funny because everything you just said will go away if he loses this fight because he already has one of the most iconic upset losses in Tito Ortiz. It would be like the second time where he lost a guy at a height where he's supposed to roll through somebody and then loses. That could be his legacy if he loses this fight. It could end up being part of like a bigger part of his legacy than
I don't think this would be as damaging as the Tito loss. Tito was considered to be fairly or unfairly was considered to be washed.
But all that momentum we're talking about, everything you're talking about, would go like that.
He's still a light heavyweight champ, even if he loses.
True.
I agree with you. It'll go away to some point because remember when he fought Anthony Johnson, it was like the winner of that was going to get the title shot, right? So it could be a sense where he got to the very top of the opportunities. He didn't live up, but in a way he loses. He's still champ.
Yeah, I mean, here's my point. I think if he loses to Fedor, it's not. Look, losses are never great, and there's always a debt to be paid whenever that happens. But I guess the point I'm trying to make, Chuck, is that there's a proof of concept that already happened. He already became the light heavyweight champ. He got put in this tournament. He advanced his spots. He gets a fight with Fedor. Man, he's not doing poorly.
It's funny that you mentioned too Vinny Magalhaes, he fought in the tough finale, and both of those guys are now in these two things. I mean, he's been sort of phenomenal because I felt like he was a wrestler first, obviously, but he developed a pretty powerful strike. I mean, he was knocking guys out as well, and I think at some point along his career, he was saying like, of course I'm going to wrestle this guy because I need a win. He would just say that stuff even though he knew that nobody wanted to hear that. And I know when he went over to Bellator, he was kind of excited because he was like, you know what? I have a flat fee. I'm no longer dealing in win bonuses. I'm not dealing in any of that. I can use my hands again. And I think that element, that freedom, has really helped him a lot.
And how good is this matchup? Seriously, from a technical standpoint, from the idea
I actually think it's great.
The bigger guy, the slugger, against the smaller wrestler. I mean, at its default, that's kind of what we love about Conor Khabib.
A lot bigger than, I would say Ryan Bader's a lot bigger than Fedor.
You're right. And Fedor's never going to be out of this fight, even if he's down for a round and a half on his back. This is going to be very good, I'm telling you.
All right, now, speaking of which, that fight's going to take place on DAZN. And DAZN...
You got to cross your arms every time you say
it. Into zone. Come on, bro.
And DAZN made some, I thought, incredible news yesterday. Canelo Alvarez signing a deal for until 2023, an 11-fight deal exclusively on DAZN for a reported $365 million. That's probably
That's the minimum.
yeah, that's the very least he's going to make. I'm sure there's a series of clauses in there about any kind of growth of subscriptions or viewership that will only boost that pay from there. So let's just call it $400 million plus. Really, is what we're talking about here. Brian, I'll go to you on this one. There's a lot of takeaways I have about this, not least of which is MMA and boxing now have a shared fate on the streaming platforms. Yep. But this is the way I would like to center the conversation for the purposes of this show. You've got Anthony Joshua on DAZN, Canelo Alvarez on DAZN. You cover WWE as well for CBS. They have their network. The UFC is still intending on doing 12 pay-per-views annually. Is that the most batshit strategy you've ever heard of?
Yes, in this modern day. This announcement, and I was there at the press conference in New York yesterday, was big for a lot of things. Why was Combate America tweeting about it? Why was all these people connected to DAZN? Because it's big across all combat sports.
Scott Coker tweeted about it.
At its face value, it's taking the biggest boxing pay-per-view star in North America off of pay-per-view. So that changes the game. And like you mentioned, it's DAZN going the Vince McMahon WWE network strategy, which we all thought UFC Fight Pass maybe could have or should have done, but instead they stuck stubbornly to the idea of maybe the 2 or 3 biggest pay-per-views will make up for all those 200,000 buys we move for the in-between ones. This is going to be really interesting. A rising tide is going to raise a lot of ships. It shifts the momentum, with the death of HBO Boxing, which was a pay-per-view provider, into this new streaming way. And with Bellator on there, with Combate, with a lot of growing boxing, the pay-per-view business is not dead. Showtime's still the #1 boxing provider, and they're doing, but it's definitely, you're challenging it now. The idea of what the WWE Network, which has proved, if we can get to 1.5 million with people at $9.99 a month, is that better than selling our soul for 3 times a year?
It's generational now. I mean, MMA has been around long enough where the people who are used to paying the pay-per-view start to, they just kind of drift away. The ideas drift away. We have a new shift in how we're getting our fights and things like that. And they're sticking to this kind of archaic first way, which just, it won't make sense. I mean, already, I don't know about you guys.
I think the deal's interesting, Chuck, because you're talking about the UFC ESPN one.
Yes.
They're trying to do everything. Let's have a little TV, a little streaming, a little
trying to do it all. It's because UFC,
last.
though, has to be stubbornly holding on to the pay-per-view model. And I'm like, at some point, I mean, right now, the numbers are, obviously, you got to take the McGregor fight is a completely separate thing. But if you just look at the rest of the numbers, they're pretty bad. I mean, and I just feel like they're going to get worse and worse and worse. And like you said, all the comparables, like the people who can traditionally draw in boxing and things like that, once those guys are on a streaming service, or it just looks like the UFC is. Where is the UFC at that point?
Right. How is it that professional wrestling and boxing, these are not businesses known for tech savvy, ahead of the game. Kind of, UFC was like, we're going to have fights on Facebook.
That's what's shocking about it.
How are they behind the times on this one?
Well, they're still playing Face the Pain.
You know what? That's a good point.
That in there.
I think there's a UFC workaround to fill the gap in here. Why don't they create a couple majors? WWE's got a WrestleMania, SummerSlam. Why doesn't UFC say, okay, New Year's Eve in Vegas, it's a major. November MSG is a major. April in Toronto, I don't know. July Fight Week in Las Vegas. Yeah. Those 4 are going to be.
They kind of try that, but it just doesn't.
They haven't officially come out and announced.
But here's the model.
The way they book the cards, it kind of feels.
So
that
you
way.
put your biggest pay-per-view draws on there. You sell those 4 as traditional pay-per-views, $80, whatever you want to do. The other remaining 8 pay-per-views you sell on Fight Pass for a one-price monthly. So I don't know if you have to raise the $9.99 to get to the price point you're. But let's say it was $15 for Fight Pass, and you're getting 8 pay-per-views.
Yeah.
You're going to get more money in the long run, would you think, than gambling that Nunez or Cyborg on an in-between headlining pay-per-view is going to move 100,000.
Yeah. And I think in a way, like, it's also, money-wise, it's not making, a lot of, financial return, having all these, lower pay-per-views, but also you're eroding the fan base. In a way, it's almost toxic. For example, we just talked about the UFC 30 main event when they booked Shevchenko versus Eubanks. And dude, the amount of negativity that came out from the public, at least, and I'm just gauging this on social media, who knows, but people were angry, people were upset, and in a way, you don't want to sort of live in a negative cloud all the time. That's bad for your brand. You know?
All the digressive, kind of complicated, silly, stupid matchmaking and interim belts and dumb things are because of the pay-per-view model. Yeah. It's because they're trying to save a pay-per-view model.
But if you had one price, wouldn't that save it? If you had one price for the other 8 pay-per-views, I wouldn't have to create create a fake
I
title every
guarantee
time.
you, if the Shevchenko Eubanks fight was booked, and let's say that would be on UFC Fight Pass, and it would be, it's still a big event, MSG, but on UFC Fight Pass, people wouldn't complain as much.
Yeah.
The problem is, man, I got to pay $60 for this.
Any other thoughts about Canelo and how big this is? They're calling it the richest contract in sports history.
It is comparable. It's not guaranteed, though, but it is comparable across the board to MLB contracts or NBA in that regard.
Yeah, I mean, he's signing Bryce Harper contracts.
I mean,
This is
it's absurd, and not this is an MMA show, but if you're in boxing now and the two biggest stars in the world, Anthony Joshua and Canelo Alvarez, are now on DAZN, that's a power move. So even for MMA fans, DAZN just made a giant leap forward and said, we are for real.
It's crazy. I was trying to explain to my wife. She's like, so we don't have to watch Canelo on pay-per-view anymore? I'm like, no, not for a long time.
You gotta watch it on
That's what I'm saying. It's a
I was like,
huge
well, we
shift.
gotta watch it on DAZN. Can't play.
No, boxing still has
Wiki.
boxing still got the problem that it's too segmented. ESPN's going to start doing pay-per-views. They got their own silo. Showtime's got a
The
silo.
last thing I'll say about this is UFC, my understanding is as long as they're in that 100,000 ballpark range for buys, they can make money.
Yeah.
So here's my hunch. My hunch is they're going to run that into the ground. They're going to do pay-per-views until they just can't anymore.
Yeah.
And I don't know if that's 2019 or 2020. My hunch is by 2020. There's no freaking way. What is it? Is it a 4 or 5 year deal with ESPN?
5.
So you mean to tell me in 2023 they're going to be running
Right.
12 pay-per-views a month?
You'd have said-
what an absurdity.
If you'd have said in 2011 when the Fox deal kicked in that they'd still be doing pay-per-views now, I would have called you crazy. I would have been like, there's no way they're still doing pay-per-views by 2018 then.
Yeah, or that Canelo would sign with a company called DAZN.
And it's crazy how DAZN has captured this. This is also and Sean Shawty brought this on the A-Side live chat Wednesdays at 1 p.m. by the way.
Yes.
Oh, look at that.
Right here, yeah.
He brought this up. He's like, yo, all these moves are just making Bellator look great. Like, all of a
So
sudden,
does.
they share the same streaming platform where Canelo,
does.
one of the biggest superstars,
Yeah, they're
is
now
fighting.
paired with a winner.
Yeah.
They're going with
And they
there
hopped
was some
on the
alpha
ship early,
dogs.
too.
Yeah.
Well, just to plug DAZN for a second, December 15th, Canelo's fighting at MSG, which is a big deal.
Rocky
Moving up
Fielding.
in weight. The same night, Bellator on DAZN from Hawaii, and a pretty good card with Machida and a couple other big names.
Yeah, but totally different time
My
zone.
point is that's an interesting strategy to put two fights on relatively at the same time, but not necessarily competing against each other because it's
Right.
an on-demand streaming network.
Somewhat separate audiences, certainly different sports, different time
But
zones,
the
frankly, different
runoff,
appeal.
the crossing of swords could be a positive.
It's a show of strength. Look what we can do. We can show Bellator in Hawaii, and we can show the biggest star in North American
They could
boxing
say
right
this
here
is the
in
biggest
MSG.
night in combat sports history, one of those catchy
Right,
things.
totally. It's crazy. It's amazing what they're doing. So, look, they have a stupid-ass name, but that company is doing some pretty incredible stuff. All right, last thing about this before we go to After the Beat. There was a fight that was announced seemingly as a backup for Cyborg versus Nunes. Megan Anderson comes back. I don't want to call her Megan. She's Megan. Takes on Kat Zingano at 145. Two questions about this, Chuck. I'll go to you on this. The first one is, what do you think about the fight itself? Right, because it is at 145. We don't really know what to make of that division still to this day.
Yeah.
And the separate question is, do you like that it is seemingly a backup for the main event?
Yes, on both accounts.
Okay.
Because we were just at this last one with Ferguson, UFC 229 with Ferguson, and it kind of give it a safety net, right? Just in case anything went wonky with the main event, we knew Ferguson was right there, and that was going to be compelling as well. I kind of feel like that's similar to what's going on with this, but I also like, Kat Zingano's talked about making this move and going up there. We've been waiting to see Megan Anderson. She's only fought once in the UFC at 145. Yeah. I just like the matchup. It's fresh. It's like it's something new, and it's fresh blood. If you look at it just for steak sliding under the door for Cyborg, it's like there's fresh meat coming in, for that sort of thing. But I like them both being on the same card.
Such a graphic image.
Well, it's kind of been like that.
Yeah, you're right. No, you're right.
But, I like that it's all kind of timed out too to be right on the same card.
Yeah, and you got to feel good for Kat Zingano. Like, I don't want to make this like a personal fan moment, but like, she's never had her opportunity. She's never, she's had a lot
One
of
time at a gas station.
One time, she's had a lot of setbacks, injuries, personal tragedies,
right.
the debacle of Rousey. I've wanted her to get back, and I still feel like there's juice left in the tank for her to have one big moment. We know she beat Nunez, that there's a storyline if she had to fill in on last minute for whatever reason, but to see her get one chance maybe at a featherweight belt wouldn't be the worst thing.
Yeah,
it would be cool.
I love the fight. I think, the fight itself is a great matchup, and it's also nice to have a backup because, I want to see, regardless of how it goes down, I want to see Cyborg fight, man. Cyborg is one of these, weird fighters that, she's so skilled, and when she fights, it's so exciting just because the brutality and just the, how, I don't want to say rage, but just the the way she approaches the fight once she's inside the cage.
Manhandles opponents at her best,
And she doesn't fight often enough. It's kind of sad in a way. So I'm glad
She never has either.
Yeah.
Even when she was manhandling people in Strikeforce, she didn't really fight that frequently.
I think we were all hoping, like, after she beat Miesha Tate, this is like a launching moment, and it just didn't kind of turn out to be, you know? But I'll say this, man, for Megan Anderson, you can say, like, oh, she's fighting all these 135ers. I'm like, well, in Holly Holm, she fought a decorated striker who has massively improved her ground game. And look at Holly physically. She is very, very, very strong. Kat Zingano's the same thing. And so to me, it's
Megan Anderson's a 45er, yeah.
She's a 45er, but Megan Anderson's real skills are on the feet. That's where she, look what she was doing to Holly Holm. Holly was like, I don't want none of that. And then, of course, showed incredible development as a mixed martial artist. But in the case of, like, here's all I'm saying. Megan Anderson should probably win this fight. But if you're talking about someone getting advantages because they're fighting someone from a division below, it's like, but two of the toughest people you could imagine a division up stylistically and physicality. She's not getting like that easy a pull here, man. This is a tough fight. So it's kind of interesting. That'll be on that New Year's Eve card. And we're all in favor that it's a good idea to have that as a backup. The interesting part is if, let's say, Amanda falls out, who gets the call up, Megan or Kat?
Go Kat.
Kat, you think? Kat or Megan?
I would say Megan.
Ooh, dissension in the ranks.
She is a striker. She is a striker. You know, she is a natural 45er, and we have contemplated that bout before. It's not like
that bout's going to be there. Kat's a little bit more of a better sell, and I think she has a shorter window long range in terms of when she's viable.
All right.
Guess we'll find out.
I still think she would have beaten Rousey if she didn't make that mistake. I'm going to go to my grave with that thought.
Well, that's a tough argument to make, but you will die on the dumbest of hills, won't you?
How dare you? How dare you?
All right, we are not done. We are not done. We have taken your questions on Twitter using the hashtag #TheMMABeat. We have assembled an array of them, and we are going to answer them now. So don't go anywhere. If you're watching on YouTube, stick around, and let's go to the next portion of the show. It's called After the Beat. It starts right now. We're going to start with it. Jesus Christ. every week. And I even made a point on the rundown, on the show notes. We need to do a really good under the radar this week, and we still, I'm the dumbest.
It's so under the radar.
I'm the dumbest man in the Milky Way. I hope everyone understands that. Luke Thomas, Danny Segura, Brian Campbell, and of course, that's Chuck Mindenhall at the end. This is After the Beat. So let's do that right now, boys. I'm so sorry to the folks in the back. I keep botching this. God, it is, kill me, Lord. You know, this is what happens when you host 3 different shows. You just lose track of shit. All right.
I should have segued.
You should get a tattoo here.
I know.
Like on Memento.
I need to
remember under the radar.
I need to be like Sarah Palin at a debate, just writing shit on my hand. Very quickly, we'll start with you. We'll do under the radar, and then we'll get to these questions. Under the radar for you, sir.
So I want to highlight a performance from last weekend over at Combate Americas. 6th division boxing world champion Amanda Serrano picked up her first win in MMA.
Where's she from?
She's actually from Bushwick.
But is she Mexican? Is she?
Well, she's. I think her parents are Puerto Rican, but she was born here in the U.S.
Okay.
And she lives in Brooklyn, and she's an amazing boxer, one of the best female boxers out there, and she's out there fighting in MMA. And her first bout, she fought to a draw. She won the first 2 rounds, and then the 3rd round she got taken down, and it was a 10-8. And here she comes back and wins by submission, rear naked choke. And she's 30, so she's young. She brings a skill set, striking wise, that not many other female competitors do bring. And this is just a performance that I feel like it was under the radar. Not many people really had their eye on. But man, in 2-3 years, I think she could be one of the best female fighters in MMA.
Under the radar for you.
Is there an under the radar element to the UFC 230 main event? It's a great Band-Aid to save the card, but the health issues, and I saw that the New York State Athletic Commission talked to MMA Junkie and said we still have more tests to do before we're going to approve this. And New York Commission has been pretty stringent since they got back in MMA, right? With the Pearl Gonzalez situation, with a few others. There's like 3 or 4 others. Jessica Aguilar with Rashad Evans, and also with not letting Paul Felder fill in at the last minute because he wasn't ranked, and that was dangerous. And we know that Daniel Cormier told you he can't even close his fist right now. We know that the Black Beast is basically on a medical suspension with Las Vegas that would carry after that November 3rd date. So all I'm trying to say is...
You got a 30% chance of seeing that fight?
All I'm trying to say is, will this be a knock at their credibility if they just go, oh yeah, we did our test, everything's fine.
All good. They'll just promote Nate Diaz. Oh wait, no.
Oh, right.
Hey, Soraya Eubanks, get back in the bullpen. All right, we may need you.
Sajara, by the way.
Sajara.
Yeah, it's Sajara.
Sriracha? No.
Sriracha, Sajara. Go ahead, Chuck. What's under the radar?
Well, mine is, it's more just an homage, really, because it was 5 years ago tomorrow, UFC 166, one of the great fights. It's kind of under the radar now, but the great fights was Gilbert Melendez against Diego Sanchez. I still really love that fight. I was thinking about that recently, and I was like, man, it's hard to believe it's been 5 years since that fight. That was one of the great.
Is that an uppercut from hell?
That was probably, in many ways, Gilbert's top UFC moment,
exactly. So I just wanted to, it's been 5 years ago. So
for me, under the radar, very quickly, if my math is correct, then the 23rd of this month will mark the end of the USADA suspension for Jessica Penney. She had an issue with a supplement. She proved it to USADA, so she was supposed to get like all first-time offenders. Hardy har har, 2 years. She got it knocked down to 16 months. She is now advocating, I saw on Instagram yesterday, for an atomweight division. I doubt the UFC will do this, but stranger things have happened. And if you just judge her by some of the stuff she's had in the UFC, she's been real up and down. But when she was in Invicta, she was tearing through people. I still think very highly of her abilities. Yeah. She's had some time off. She does the Two Straws podcast with Angela Hill. And she'll be back, it looks like, officially, or ready to be back in about less than a week. So keep your eye on that. All right. Now, time for After the Beat, where we take your questions using the hashtag #TheMMABeat. You have submitted some good ones, some bad ones, some dumb ones, and I have picked from all three. So let us begin this little part. That's my joke.
Yeah.
All right, Danny, you go first. Did you guys have any thoughts on Herb Dean's decision not to stand up Khabib and Conor up in the first round, despite Khabib only landing 7 punches? By the way, I've not verified if these numbers are correct. Let's assume that they are. 7 punches in the whole freaking round, going for 0 subs and being on top for 4+ minutes.
I didn't have any thoughts because I didn't disagree with it. This is sort of the same position that we were in when Henry Cejudo fought Demetrius Johnson, right? This is not just any fight. This is a title fight. And one of the things that I love about high-level MMA is that there's almost no unnecessary move. Every single move that those guys make in there is calculated and it has a purpose. Everything that Khabib was doing, sure, he might have not been working as much as other people would have liked, but man, he was doing wrist control. He was still landing heavy shots, and I know maybe at some moments it might have gotten a little boring, but he's still holding Conor McGregor down. A trained fighter that's been training for months to try to get up. This is what a fight's supposed to look like. If you don't like the ground game, go to boxing. Watch some stand up there. But this is what MMA is. So no thoughts against that.
There was a kind of gambler's groan in the arena because he was being held down, and people were just like, "Oh my God, why did I take McGregor?" Like that's kind of the feeling it was, and so that made the sense of like stand him up, just because there was that sort of thing in play. It also didn't help that McGregor was looking at Herb Dean quite a bit, just like, "Hey, what else do I have to do here? Can you stand this fight up?" But ultimately, when it came down to it, I was right there watching it at cage side. He was on our side, and you could see Nurmagomedov trying to improve. He was trying to get around him, and he was trying to get things rolling for himself. And I don't know where there would have been an opportunity. There was no stall. It wasn't like he was stalling. He wasn't doing anything like that. So there was never an opportunity where I saw Herb kind of come in there a little bit, and then he's like, he saw what I saw. So I didn't have any problem with that.
Well, the difference between the first round and the other rounds was Conor was seeded for a lot of that takedown in the first round. So there was some built-in drama. Is he going to get up or is he going to succumb?
It was like,
and he didn't succumb till late in that round. So I was completely fine with that.
Yeah, I mean, this is the last refuge of McGregor fans who just can't accept that their guy lost.
Yeah.
That's all it comes down to. I made the point in the Demetrius Johnson fight when we were on the MMA Hour, and you recall this, and it's a good thing that you brought it up, where if I'm wrestling you and you're making super active attempts to get to your feet, and I'm preventing this, and we are in active dance here.
It's a battle.
I'm winning, you're losing, and that's just the way that it goes. So either get better at it, or you let it wash over you, but if the best you can do is make me the superior wrestler in exchange, you're losing. I will say this, though. And Herb Dean, I think, went on his Instagram page and was like, I don't really want to intervene. I will say, I mean, it's going to sound like I'm contradicting myself. I just don't think that this was the reason to intervene because I thought there was enough action. this referee attitude of like, I don't want to interfere with the purity of this experience.
If anything, if anything, the talk about this should be about McGregor's fouls within.
Yeah, that's the real story.
That's the real story.
Dude, Conor grabbed, the fence.
I gotta say though, Herb Dean stood his ground. There was some dissension in the ranks because people wanted to see it stood up, and you could see he was not succumbing to that. There are referees who do.
Yes.
When the boos start raining in, there are referees like, I better do something.
Yep.
Yeah.
They feel like it's their job at that point to then intervene. But
I love Big Dan Mergliata. I think he's one of those guys sometimes.
Yeah.
I mean, and you ever talk to Big Dan? It's
difficult job.
He's the nicest guy in the world, and I'm sure he doesn't believe. And I'm not saying it's every time, but I've seen a couple times where I was like, I don't know.
John Fitch loved it. He thought it was great.
Yeah.
I'm sure he did,
Yeah, but that's people think of like if you're in guard and I'm on top, and you're in full guard and I'm on top, and I'm like, they think that is what Khabib was doing or something. Like they were both in something of a neutral position. Khabib was scooping his legs to the point where he couldn't put his heels on the ground.
Yeah,
Stop.
He's dominating
He
that
lost.
situation.
It's over. All right?
Yeah.
All right.
Luke
next.
Thomas is pissed off. Where's the manila folders, right?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for still, yeah. You know what was amazing? I did that show and no one paid attention. And then it was over, and everyone's like, I love that show. Well, why didn't you watch it when we were making it?
That should be a segment in this show, and you can talk about Ronda Rousey saying that stars get extra treatment.
Kills me, man.
Yeah.
Kills me. All right, next. All right, what are some of the best and worst fighter nicknames, Brian? Because you come from boxing, too, so you must have seen it. And what would Chuck Mindenhall's be? Hold on a second. Do you remember, who's the guy from the Contender from the Northern Virginia area? I forget his name now.
The original contender?
The original Contender.
Jimmy Lang?
Jimmy Lang. So Jimmy Lang used to put on fights at the Patriot Center, and I used to go to all of them, okay? Because I'm a degenerate loser with no friends.
Yeah, probably.
There was a guy on the undercard. This is the best. This is a true nickname. And he was super bricked up. I don't think he became anything. So let's just call him John Smith. And his nickname was Cut Up from the Butt Up. True story. He was super bricked up, but that was his nickname. Cut Up from the Butt Up. And I was like, all right, I guess so.
Damn.
Best and worst.
The best is always going to be touchy-feely, and I know it's overplayed, but it's so good. That's so perfect.
It is pretty
In
good.
boxing, I always loved Juan Lazcano, the Hispanic causing panic. Is there anything better than that?
I like El Terremoto. I like that.
Terremoto, yeah.
The earthquake. It just sounds cool.
I like the man in the hat. That's not bad. Right?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's good.
Yeah, but you couldn't wear the hat in the ring of the
It would
cage.
just be.
Well, if it's
I don't
a
know what
Reebok
I'd be
hat.
in the cage. I don't know why they include me in that, but it wasn't
I'd say the
question good enough.
worst is Semtex Paul Daly, because it took me a while to figure out what Semtex was. I always thought it was like tampons or something. It's just like, you didn't play Call of Duty? No, it's too close. It's too
You
close.
didn't play Call of Duty? So you gotta.
Oh my
no,
God.
I actually like some.
You're gonna get me in trouble. He's gonna like punch me in the face. Like, are you Brian Campbell?
What's
No.
the guy's name? Jesse the Water Bong? That was.
Jesse Bongfeld.
Bongfeld,
Jesse
that's what it was.
Bongfeld.
That was
the
the-
water Bongfeld.
That was no good.
I like. I've also Axe Murderer was really good.
Yeah,
Axe
to be
Murderer
honest
was
with
really
you.
I like Pitbull.
It's
Kidding, guys.
It's so original. Huh?
You know what? It's not like super clever or like a play on words, but it was the other ones that I like are like fitting. So like the Prodigy, BJ
Yeah.
Penn. That always felt like really appropriate.
Yeah.
I didn't hate it.
What about the Iceman? It's
Iceman was great.
It's classic.
By the way, in my phone, you're Iceman Mindenhall.
Oh,
Did you
wow.
know that?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
See that?
I always text you as Iceman Mindenhall. But I
What was
never.
Junie Brownie's nickname again?
Junie Browning. I
I
don't.
wanted to get that name in the show.
Oh, I don't know.
Yeah, there you go.
Hold on.
One
You threw me off my thing. I said I didn't hate it, I didn't love it, but I never really got behind Rush for St-Pierre.
Yeah.
It never connected. I didn't look at it and go, oh, that's terrible. But like I didn't. It was fine. It was whatever. Beast in 25-8 is one of the all-time battles.
Yeah, Matt Riddle should have went with the King of Bros though when he was in the UFC. I mean, that would have been that would have helped him a lot.
now.
I think when Diego Sanchez was fighting the Nightmare, when he was young Diego Sanchez, because he really was a nightmare to fight. Like it was just a complicated guy and always in your face. I really like that one. It was cool.
Any other ones?
Tamden McCrory is one of the worst ones.
Barn Cat.
Yeah.
No, I love Barn
Yeah, it's like a
Cat.
feral. Come on.
Get out.
You don't like the Barn Cat?
No, I don't. No.
Oh, I thought the Barn Cat was
That one
cool,
was good.
man.
That one was good.
I'm a fan of Roy McDonald, but the Red King, right?
Well, I don't even.
He's had like three of
He's
them.
had a few.
He's had like three.
Whenever he had the Red King, I don't know if he still does. I don't
Aries or something like that.
Aries,
or Aries.
You know what? At first, I felt a little weird saying it, but I do like the Black Beast.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
yeah.
Black Beast,
You're like,
yeah,
am I
Black Beast,
racist?
I still
for
feel weird
Black
saying
Beast?
it. What do you got?
Yeah, no, but like, it's like, oh, I like this guy. He's called the Black Beast. What? What are you saying? You have to, in polite company, you have to kind of contextualize that
That's
one.
his nickname.
I bet he picked
there's
that
a
name
lot.
just to make white people nervous too. That'd be
There's a
great.
lot. You got to respect. It's almost like you have to go down and understand why they named themselves what they did.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's homage.
Yeah, that's
sometimes it's like
Cara de Zapato, Shoeface.
Yes,
Shoeface, yeah.
Shoeface is a great one.
I mean, there are a lot of good ones. There are some pretty bad ones though.
Hey, Uncle Creepy's a great one.
That is a
great one.
He always it was fitted his style.
All right,
Pistachios.
So there you go. Any last nicknames, good or bad? That's it. Who had like Oh, you know what? Bernard Hopkins as the executioner, amazing. Bernard Hopkins as the alien.
No.
I wish I had more hands.
That's
I'd give
like-
that nickname. Fourth
That's
one
like
down.
Van Hagar. That's
What about the Carney?
Nick Lenz. That's a good nickname. It just didn't catch on.
I know.
It was a good one though. He is a bit of
Nick
a corny,
Lenz
right?
never really caught on.
Yeah. all right,
Wait,
well,
but you didn't answer the question. What would your nickname be?
I don't know, man.
The Iceman?
Yes.
Jack Frost. I don't know.
the ice hole. Yeah, no, just cut that part.
All right.
Yes, edit
let's
that.
see. What do we have next? What does more pay-per-view buys, Chuck?
Oof. See here.
DC versus Lesnar or DC versus Jones 3. Now, let me set this up.
Okay.
I had an argument with my producer about this, and he was trying to say, like, DC doesn't need to wait for the Lesnar fight because the third Jones fight would be as good or more in terms of sales.
Yeah.
I don't think that's a bad argument. Is he right?
I still think the Lesnar fight.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, what did their second fight do? Was it 600?
No. Second one did almost 900. It did 800 plus.
800?
It's a little closer than you might think. Plus, Lesnar looking a little bit shriveled, you know?
I think any Lesnar fight does over a mil, so.
I think
It's tough. If the series were 1-1, if something, I don't know. I just feel like the way the series is played out from the competitive. I hate to say it because how do you discount a guy like Cormier? You know what I mean? I just don't know how you say it, but it's like
Maybe
from a
if it was a
competitive
heavyweight-
standpoint, what we've seen so far, I feel like that would hinder it to an
Well, does
extent.
it help or hurt the idea of DC Jones 3 if Jones either runs through Gustafsson and announces that he's back and we start doing the, oh my God, he really is the GOAT argument, or if he just barely
point,
wins
too.
in a really
Yeah.
rough fight? Which one helps or hurts the DC?
I think if he wins, it doesn't necessarily matter all that much. What matters is what he says afterwards.
Yeah,
If
that's
he gets
true.
out there and says, "Daniel, I'm coming for you."
Yeah.
The tension.
It
will
has
be
to. It has to be something like that.
Yeah, so like Lesnar's all about grabbing the casuals, but you can grab the casuals with the juicy storyline of now this is for the heavyweight championship, and DC's going to have to play up the USADA steroid argument, the whole promotion, and be like, you're not the real anything, you're a fraud. Yeah,
I just think
I'm
it's an
gonna go with the
interesting
latter.
question because I don't think folks thought of it that way. They thought, well, here's the money fight, here's a good fight, but here's the money fight. They're overlapped. Do you agree or no?
I would still say the Lesnar. I think a Jones Cormier fight, especially if it's a heavyweight, the third one, I think it'll be big. It'll do well. But man, Lesnar is always drawing, some of the top pay-per-views. So I don't know.
I'd
still go with the Lesnar.
You might be right. But my hunch is that if I was forced to pick, I'd probably still say Lesnar does more.
Yeah.
But it's probably a lot more competitive. in
But-
terms of
Yeah, I
those.
don't think it'd be too far
Let's
off.
think about this though. Lesnar at UFC 200 with DC and Jones falling off, and Lesnar, although he wasn't in the main event, was then pushed as the face with Anderson Silva behind him.
No,
That
Amanda
almost-
Nunes versus Misha Tate was your main event.
Right, but I'm saying the
There,
face.
guy.
Even with I was there. I understand that. Even with Jones off the card, Lesnar then got pushed as the face of that card.
Sure.
Anderson Silva behind him, and it still only did 1.1. So if that only did that, and we think of Brock Lesnar's brand being bigger then because we hadn't seen him in so many years, then there's the idea that DC.
But it wasn't
Lesnar
for a
could
title,
do
and
less.
he was also, down on the card. Like it was. I didn't feel like that card was promoted too heavily on Brock Lesnar. Also, it wasn't that fight like last minute. The whole Brock Lesnar coming back, right? If I'm not mistaken.
Yes, because they waived the USADA
They waived the
restriction.
USADA restriction.
And remember, Cormier and DC had the pushing incident,
Yeah,
which they can
right.
just replay. He and Hunt had to that point no
beef.
How many times has Jones Cormier been booked? They fought twice, but hasn't it been booked like 5 times?
2 other times.
I can't even keep track.
So it's like the other thing is like, at what point do we just say like, gosh, these guys are going at it again? You know what I mean? I don't know. I don't know if it would be this one or not, but I honestly think that the competitive aspect of it, just because they haven't been great fights in that sense, would probably be the biggest hindrance towards it. So the Lesnar one is just fresh. It's like a fresh matchup. I don't know. That's
Fair enough, though.
Yeah.
And he was a heavyweight champ too.
Yeah.
So there's that as well. All right, next, please. Let's see. Who have I not called on? Have I called on all of you at this point? Then let's just go to the table. Do you guys think that Jimmy Smith is underused by the UFC? Now, here's the interesting question that this raises, which is, at first I thought he was perfectly used. but they had him doing all the small fight night cards, and I guess that's what they're waiting for. Rogan seems to always like inch his way out the door, and he's not there yet. He's still doing, and I'm not asking him to. I'm not making that. I think him and Cruz and him and Cormier do a great job. But what I am saying is, do you think he is the heir apparent to Rogan? That to me is the interesting question.
Yeah.
What do you guys think?
Yeah, he is the heir apparent. I think that's why they brought him in. He does a poor man's Joe Rogan style.
Oh,
so he's
get
not,
outta here.
He's really
Get outta
good.
here.
He's really good. I've loved him in Bellator, but he does a poor man's Joe Rogan style.
You are
So that's
so
why.
wrong about this. You are so wrong.
So that's why he's not being underused right now. He's being perfectly used. And long term, if he replaces Joe, I'll be more than happy. Because guess what? I really like him. Even though he's a poor man's Joe Rogan. But guess what? Joe Rogan's maybe the greatest of all time to do that.
Can you imagine, this is the guy who goes on a first date. He's like, you're like a poor woman's ex-girlfriend. It's like,
I don't think they should do Joe and Jimmy together like they've done. I think the third spot is always great with a current or just recently retired fighter. So I think I just nailed it, guys.
Yeah,
I mean, he can't handle it.
I completely disagree. He is not a poor man's Joe Rogan. He's very different than Joe Rogan. Joe Rogan likes this sweeping rhetoric and these long, sort of general macro observations. Jimmy Smith is totally the opposite. He is granular, specific, short, pithy, to the point. He does an absolute assload of homework.
He's very clear with what he's explaining.
Totally. They have very different styles.
I think he's just going off by the fact that they're both,
They are bald. They are bald.
You struck a lot of big words. You want to pick any of those up?
Yes, for you, donkey. I can't believe you think. It just drives me nuts.
Well,
It's like,
I think you're misinterpreting that as me being ignorant and not knowing Jimmy Smith and not really.
No,
just
it's not
being
what I'm saying. It's not what I'm saying.
I mean, he's great. He's going to be a great replacement for
when
him.
you say
one day.
poor man's Joe Rogan, he's not doing an impression of Joe. He's doing his own
He's not, but I'm saying they're so much closer. You may have been able to break down specifically why they're different, but to me, they're so much closer than any other person coming into that booth. By the way, Randy Couture's still really good at that job. I kind of wish he was in that slot with
him on the PFL shows. You're right.
Yeah. Let me just throw in there Frank Mir over at Bellator. Frank Mir's amazing.
Good.
Yeah.
By the way, do you guys like the Bellator desk? I have to tell you, I like the analysis that comes off of it, but it is murdering their pacing.
That's what I don't like about it.
Karen Bryant raised this, I think, on Twitter once, and she's got a good point. Like, we've murdered Fox Sports 1 for their pacing. And Bellator used to be pretty good about it. Now they got the desk, and it's like Josh Thompson, great. Frank Mir, great.
Yeah.
But fellas,
Well, do you know why I like it? Because they got a
That's the
bigger
problem.
problem, and his name's Goldie.
don't even get me started. I'll get angry tweets. People always angrily tweet me. They never angrily tweet any of you
Well,
guys.
I'm not trying to do it to get tweets, but Goldie's brutal right now. This is the wash portion of his career. and
Dude, I have
John Anik. Isn't
Yeah. You know what he is? He's a poor man's UFC Goldie, and that's obviously the reality. But that's all right. Thank you.
Wait, you're saying You're saying Bellator Goldie is a poor man's Goldie?
Well, obviously it is. Yeah, he's in the second half of his career. He's a little washed. But I'm just saying, I'm not down for this era.
Bro, he's gonna find you at a Bellator show,
Yes,
and I'm gonna put the fist fight on World Star Hip Hop.
It is time.
World Star.
I used to ride that argument all the time, and everyone told me I'm wrong, and now everyone's come around to it. So whatever. Sort of my effing career. All right, next. Let's see. What is each panelist's favorite?
again.
Yeah, fuck off. I'm gonna keep doing this stuff until you guys get it right. All right, Chuck. Smart ass.
We've done this before, haven't we? This exact question.
Yeah, you know why? That's why I brought it back.
So the same thing exists. It's like, what genre? I mean, because can you pick just a single movie?
yes.
Yeah, it's
Okay.
difficult.
You start then.
The Last Emperor. Easy call.
Last Emperor.
You don't recall this?
80s.
Either late 80s or early 90s, yeah. Starts out with a
have
guy
seen
slitting his wrist in the sink. The whole bit, yes.
That's a good movie.
It is a totally, it's a masterpiece is what it is.
I don't know. You guys go next.
It's such a difficult question because under what purpose? Like,
For fuck's sake. I mean, what is a movie you like to
say-
watch a lot?
This is almost as brutal as when you asked him his favorite band.
because that's also a difficult question. I would say the Lord of the Rings trilogy. That's an all-time great for me.
Well, you're really reaching for the height of the art
That's a
here.
great movie, but that's what I'm talking about. Like what? I can also
A movie that you would brag about to someone to look like you knew a lot about movies. How about that?
All right, I'll throw out. I just mentioned Memento earlier. That's a great movie.
Okay, I like that one. There you go. Stop. Pretend like you're trying to impress somebody.
No, well, this isn't depressing, but I like buddy comedy dramas, like Diner, like in that category. And Beautiful Girls, 1996 has always been my favorite movie.
haven't seen that.
It's got an all-star
That's a good
cast.
movie. I just watched that recently.
Yeah, Timothy
And I watched
Hutton,
Diner
Michael
recently.
Rappaport.
Is that right? I've not seen this.
It's a fantastic movie about a guy
Champagne Diamond.
around his tenure. Exactly. Around you. I had the line and I dropped it. Anyway,
So that would be
coming
more
back-
under independence.
Oh, this guy.
It could trend more in that territory, yes.
Okay.
You bought a champagne diamond for a girl you ain't even. Yeah, all right. Go ahead. Thank you.
Quote in here.
Yeah.
Give me something.
In terms of movies that that I've loved the whole way, it would be Star Wars, just the original Star Wars.
Fucking, what are you doing over
Because
here?
it's like you're looking at just a movie that you're like, okay, this is the one.
I like how
movie.
you guys act. This is like so hard a question. Well,
I don't know. I honestly don't know if I have like a favorite movie, like a movie that I'm just like.
Tommy Boy.
Any artsy,
Tommy Boy is good.
was a good one. A favorite comedy.
Cable Guy was an excellent movie. I love that. movie.
I always used in college as like a litmus test for people. I'd always be like, "Do you like Dumb and Dumber?" And if the answer was no,
Yeah.
I just your boy.
See,
moved on
again,
at
that is
point.
like one of the best movies in terms of a comedy, though. And then would you put it past like something like a serious drama? I don't know.
No, I would not put it on par with a serious drama. no.
So that's what I'm saying. It's hard. I have a lot of favorite movies, but it would be.
These questions got to be more specific. Like, what's your best,
Guys,
horror movie?
guys,
What's your
I
best
tried.
action movie?
I tried.
Comedy.
Fedor, what's your favorite Russian movie?
Yeah. No, you don't need to qualify with Russian. It's like, what's your favorite food? Russian food.
Yeah.
What's your favorite, like,
Alvarez was my favorite.
what's your favorite book? Russian books. It's like, all right, well.
He wasn't Russian. He wasn't Russian to do an interview with me the next day when he canceled. I'm going to blame you for that.
Yeah, what can I do?
Century Russian literature is very good, though. I have to say that.
All right.
Yeah.
Thanks.
You already knew that, though.
I did know that. God damn it. All right, let's move on. You guys are ruining my day already. Let's see. Let's go to you, Brian.
Oh, here we
What
go.
kind of world are we living in where the great Mauro Ranallo is not calling fights with the biggest organizations in the industry? Now, he put out a tweet recently where he said, hey, MMA promoters, I'm looking to call fights. And I reached out to Bellator to ask if he was still with them. They told me he was. And then I asked to do an interview with him, and he said he wasn't doing interviews right now. So I don't know what the situation was, but recall, there wasn't a Showtime show or a Glory show for the two back-to-back Bellator shows. Like, there was no conflict, right?
No.
The Bud Crawford fight was on ESPN. Yep. So it was Joe Tessitore and Timothy Bradley and all them. So there was two Bellator shows and he didn't call any of them. I don't know what that means, but I found that a little bit odd. Do you find that odd?
I did find that on. They said, what kind of world? It's a cruel world that doesn't understand value. And I'm a big Morrow guy. Love him. I didn't necessarily like when they had him alternating with Goldie. I got it. Bellator was trying to bring Goldie in to have that presence and that callback to UFC. But to me, Morrow's the guy in all three sports. I mean, I know that certain boxing fans think that there's a little too much pro wrestling in his shtick, but he handles the big moment better than anyone. I don't know what's going on. That seemed like a very interesting and timely tweet, and I hope Bellator or anyone else jumps in and makes this guy the face of what they're doing.
He's got some of the best reactions to moments in all kinds of sports. So, the more we see of that, the better.
He's the best. He's the best combat sports commentator ever. I don't know how anyone could argue with that. There are some guys on the rise, and granted, you could say, well, there's color guys and there's play-by-play guys. I get it. I think even with that distinction, he's the best.
His memory bank is insane. Like, I feel like he just flips through
He's
files
also witnessed so much.
with enthusiasm. Yeah. So there's enthusiasm. He's reaching toward crescendo, but yet he's also flipping through files in his mind. It's amazing. I don't know how he does it.
Understand, he does boxing. He has done Pride, that's what MMA. He has done kickboxing with Glory and other shows as well, and he does pro wrestling. Nobody could do that except Mauro Ranallo. Period. It's not possible. And you mentioned that he's got this memory bank, but I think it's actually more than that. He can go to Japan and understand the cultural sensitivities about these guys having Bushido spirit and what the Japanese audience is looking for, and then fly to Amsterdam and do the same thing with a kickboxing show, then fly to Mohegan Sun and do the same thing with an MMA show. There is literally no one else on the planet who can do that. Yep. It's not possible. So I don't know what the situation is. I hope it's just maybe there's a work conflict or whatever the hell's going on. I don't know. But if Mauro Ranallo's available and you don't hire him, GTFO. Shocking to me that's even a thing that exists. All right, next. Let's go to, all right, Danny. Who's your favorite stand-up comedian and why? Oh, here we go. What kind of stand-up
You mean like a serious stand-up
black
comedian?
one, a white one, one who does improv, a bit in movies? Just answer the freaking question.
I have a few. I like Cat Williams a lot.
Okay.
I think he's hilarious.
What's Pimpin' on?
Yeah.
His fantastic work. Yep.
I think he recently took out a special on Netflix.
Yep. Who hasn't at this point? But
it was really good. Joe Rogan, I like Joe Rogan as well.
Okay.
He always brings, he's funny, but he also brings like some sort of realism and like an interesting perspective on
High
things.
energy.
Yeah. And
He's a poor man's Jimmy Smith as a comedian, but he's pretty good.
Dave Chappelle's hilarious as well. But I really like Cat Williams.
Cat Williams is great. He's a great call. What about you, Brian?
I'm a little old school, but I loved Dennis Leary when he was in his prime. He was the best. He's watched
You
now.
seem like a Dennis Leary
But
guy.
no, come on. No Cure for Cancer, 1991. I still
Yeah, that's
think
a great
my
album. I
favorite.
mean, half of it was Bill Hicks's material, but okay.
Oh, wow. What are you, Joe Rogan here? I mean, come on.
No, it really was. I'm a huge Bill Hicks guy. I've read about his biography. I have mixtapes you can't even find on eBay. I've researched his life. Like I've gone to places where he used to hang out, and
A little scary, right?
no, but he's
Little stalker.
and over time I actually found him to be a little annoyingly preachy. Shocker, because that's the same criticism I get. But the point being is, Dennis Leary's No Cure for Cancer. The one bit was about the cow. It's like we don't want to, we only want to save the cute animals. It's like, what are you? I'm an otter. You're free to go. What are you? You're a cow. You're a baseball glove. Get on that truck. That's a good bit.
Hey,
But the
Brendan
bit-
Schaub's probably my current favorite.
But the bit where he takes the microphone and puts it in his throat, that's a
Now you're mine. Oh man, I love George Carlin, man. I like his philosophical.
Prolific stand-up artist.
Yeah, it's like guys like Stephen Wright. These are just completely different. But then old school guys. I mean, guys like Don Rickles. You watch those guys now, and you're just like,
Geniuses.
that's insane, right?
Dude,
Like these guys are just they were so good, and they set the template for so many others. But I could go back and watch any of those old Richard Pryor, guys like that. The guys who are doing it.
Pryor's probably the GOAT. Probably the GOAT is Pryor. For me, it's an easy call. I'd say currently, I don't know how much stand-up he's doing, but Bill Burr currently, like among guys who are out there. But for me, the god is Patrice O'Neal. I just don't know how anybody could argue otherwise.
I thought you were going Dice Clay there for a second, but
Dice Clay.
by the way, that material is not dated well. Not aged well.
It turns out, hickory dickory.
That's pretty good.
But no, Patrice O'Neal, I mean, he was special for a lot of reasons, but not least of which was it was effortless for him.
Yeah.
He had totally his own delivery and his own style. People kind of wrap him up in today's modern anti-PC movement, which is partly fair, but partly not fair. So I think a lot of people don't really understand him properly, but he was fearless. Fearless. When I see comedy, if someone just repeats back to me something that's funny, that is widely accepted, you are worthless to me. But Patrice O'Neal was never afraid of offending his own audience and having people walk out, and would do it time after time. He even said he did an interview once, and he was like, if at least 10% of my audience is not unhappy, so I'm doing something wrong. Like
Who said that, Dana?
No. Patrice, yeah, right. Patrice. So for me, and by the way, he always thought that the DC Improv was his favorite club. So I miss Patrice. I miss him.
Yeah.
You ever see that? Do you ever find his old album? He recorded his last one. He recorded at the DC Improv. There's a bit called Tolu, where he pulls a guy in the audience who was African, and he goes, "What's your name, brother?" And he's like, "Tolu," and he savages this dude for about 11 minutes of improv, and I every time I hear it, I am crying with laughter. Tolu. Go find that. Patrice O'Neal, the genius, total genius. So
No mention of Roseanne.
you know, you start
Louis C.K. for you.
Louis C.K. But then Louis C.K. was good, but he was. What do you want to say about him? I mean, as a comedian, I thought it was funny, but he was never. This is gonna sound crazy. He was never edgy enough for me.
Yeah.
He was always a little too like, oh, I'm in my mid-30s. I drive a Prius. He's edgy.
What about Prime Chris Rock? Late 90s.
Amazing.
Chris Rock's amazing.
Yeah, his album Bigger and Blacker was good, but the one before that, Born Black, I think it was called, or Born Suspect. Born Suspect. That's the good one. Or when he compares grocery stores in the hood to grocery stores in suburbia, is truly like a magnificent bit. But yeah, Bill Hicks.
There's so many. There's so many. You just break it into eras.
We didn't name any women. Any women that make you guys laugh?
Let's see.
This is a sad question. Well, I set you guys up. Holy shit.
Not that have made me cry, but that's.
Who was the one on Netflix now? The
just don't
Asian
know the
lady,
names.
Amy Wong, or
Amy Wong, yeah.
It was something.
Yeah.
I watched her special.
Oh yeah, she had a funny bit. I saw like a clip where she was talking about how like she slept with some guy, and then she was like, oh, I didn't know if he was homeless or hipster.
It's not bad.
And was trying to make trying to tell the difference between the two.
Speaking of Don Rickles, you know who used to be good until she turned all super PC? Which I say is a left winger, by the way. Sarah Silverman.
Yeah.
I was just going to say that.
Sarah Silverman.
I was just going to give that same caveat.
Sarah Silverman used to be savage. Jeff Ross for all the insult comedy he does.
Yeah.
Great. We got any more?
Yeah, there's a ton.
That's it. We're done. All right. Any last words, boys? Show's going to be canceled after this. We're going to get beat up. You. The poor man's Joe Rogan. Okay.
I think it's time for you to give that jump up, and get down catchphrase you always do at the end.
Yes, I need to do that. It's also awful. Okay, I don't know that we're going to be back next week, so we'll have to play that one by ear. But of course, we'll be back after that because that's going to be UFC 235 week. It's going to be kind of nuts. God only knows, to your point about the injuries, what the hell's going to happen that week. So stay tuned. We appreciate you guys tuning in. As always, keep using the hashtag the MMA Beat. For Chuck, for Brian, for Danny, I am Luke. Until next time, hands up, chin down, let them fly. This is the MMA Beat.